Hi, everybody. Welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. I'm Matt Connerton, and this is Gary Hopper, State Rep Gary Hopper, who is busy reading to prepare for the show. How's that going, Gary?
What?
And I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, well, you
you
said
still- are you still reading?
what?
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt again.
Yeah, no, you said prepare for the show. Which show?
Well, we're going to do a show now. We're actually live on the air.
Oh,
Yeah, it's kind of, we do this every week.
we do?
Gary has a head injury. I don't know if you
No,
guys
I
know.
got
don't
drain
know.
damage. That's different.
Well, but isn't that how you got the drain damage?
I don't remember.
See, I didn't
So
think you did.
no, you said the shows. The thing is I'm doing some research for the show.
It's always like this, by the way, if you're wondering. This is what we're in for.
Well, there's a
I don't know
gun.
if you've seen it.
No, well, see, there's a gun show. There's a gun show this Saturday and Sunday at the Manchester.
Oh,
So I'm reading Shotgun News because I need a new hunting rifle.
do you?
Yeah, I was thinking AK-47's really effective.
I don't know much about guns, but
Yeah. You can't. Well, you need my eyes aren't that good, so I need like at least 30 round,
What
100
about-
round drum or something.
what about one of these? You just
Yeah,
huck-
well,
huck it
we
at the-
haven't made that legal, the hand grenade hunting for whitetail yet, so I gotta
Oh.
still work on that.
Right.
You know, you jump in the gun.
Well, no. In this case, I'm jumping the grenade.
Yeah, jump in the grenade. This is. We have wonderful guests tonight. We have Representative Neil Kirk from Ware, and we have Claire Ebel, who is the executive director.
Yes.
Executive director of the ACLU branch of the New Hampshire. Am I correct?
That is more or less correct.
More or less correct.
Yes. It's the New Hampshire Civil Liberties Union. We didn't change our name when all the other affiliates did.
Oh,
They've all
okay.
become the ACLU of Massachusetts and the ACLU of Pennsylvania. We're still the New Hampshire Civil Liberties Union.
you're nonconformist. I like that. Good for you.
Someone has said that before, yes, a time or two.
Yeah, that's good.
Now, we're here tonight to talk about privacy issues, and that's basically the focus of it. On the title, it says RFID, and for those people who don't know what that is, RFID is Radio Frequency Identification Device. Is that correct? Did I get that's four things I remembered in a row. And
I screwed up the poll question then. I misunderstood.
Well, what was the poll question?
The poll
anyway?
question was real ID, which is something different.
Not that much different.
Not that much different.
Anyway, what was the question?
Well, the question was, how concerned are you that Real ID presents a risk to our privacy? And this is, we're going to have a weekly poll question up on ipmnation.com/rockpaper where you can check out the poll question, and we'll tell you the results each week. And the results were 73% said they're extremely concerned and that it must be stopped.
Right.
Not a big surprise because it is very controversial. 18% said somewhat concerned, and 9% said not concerned at all. It does not impinge on my privacy.
And what percent said, what the heck are you talking about?
I didn't have that. I did have mildly concerned, but that got 0%.
Okay,
So, but most people, 3 out of 4 people, were extremely concerned.
that's really good.
Yeah.
Now, first, what we're going to go is, these are a couple of the people in the New Hampshire legislature who are not in the, obviously you're not in the legislature, you're a lobbyist at the legislature, but that have worked very, very hard at trying to fight back against people's the infringements on people's liberty and privacy. And that's why they were invited here tonight.
Okay.
And in the news this week was Hank Williams Jr. got really upset because his big thing was that the Republicans and Democrats were playing golf together.
Yes, that was
And
very.
he thought that was so he really well, no, I think a lot of people have that perception because they watch the news too much, and the perception is everybody fights like cats and dogs.
Right.
Okay, Claire and I are typically on the opposite side of quite a few issues,
This is true.
and she really gets me angry.
Occasionally.
Typically because she's better prepared than I am and knows what she's talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
But on other issues, we're working very closely together. I was on Science and Tech when I got reelected in '07, and they had a bill to empower, I love that word, empower the Attorney General to what do they call it? What kind of? It was basically a wiretapping thing.
Yeah.
So that if a young kid called or somebody called in a bomb threat to the local school, the attorney general or its designee could start tapping that phone right away.
Okay.
They didn't need a judicial oversight.
Oh, okay. No,
Okay.
no warrant. In other
No
words, yeah.
warrant.
Okay.
Exactly.
And they wanted to extend that to the credit card information, to the internet information,
The bank.
and the bank information with no warrant. Okay, no judge. I said,
Wow.
well, you don't even like get this reviewed after the fact at least. So somebody has some kind of, no, we don't need to.
Wow.
And I said, you don't think there might be somebody who's a little bit crooked that would get a lot of people's information because they don't have any oversight and maybe they'd take off to Brazil with the money?
Yeah.
Oh, no. These are all honorable people who would never do anything like
Oh,
that.
of
It's like-
course.
So anyway, like on instances like that, Claire and I were working hand in hand trying to do something about that. I don't think the bill ended up, I think, dying,
Yes, it did.
but in part due to that close cooperation.
good, good.
As Representative Kirk told me when I was a freshman back in 2001, be careful who you antagonize because you might need them on something else.
Right.
So when you see politicians in Washington, D.C. getting along, it's because they have to.
Yeah, and it's a good thing.
Some days.
Yeah.
Some days, like today, the union was buying everybody dinner,
Ah,
and that was really a good thing. I got a free...
Did you get
hamburger.
lasagna?
No, I got No, that was a different
Oh.
group that
Oh.
paid for lasagna a couple
Oh.
weeks ago.
Yeah.
But anyway, so first I'll let Claire introduce herself and tell her a little bit about yourself, how you got involved in this. I know it's for the money, but you don't have to talk about that.
absolutely, yeah. I've been the executive director of the New Hampshire Civil Liberties Union since September of 1982. So I am, I think, in my 30th year. My math isn't as good as it used to be.
It's 29. It's okay.
It's 30th year though. I've been there for 29 years and a month.
Oh, I see.
So now I'm in my 30th year,
Oh,
aren't I?
I
I
don't
hope
know.
so.
Math is hard. I don't like math either.
Yeah, let's
It's
skip
discouraging.
that
We should
question.
let's forget about that. We'll forget about
This is
the
numbers.
years. Years
Yeah,
are years are just they're just a sort of blur.
Yeah.
I actually joined the ACLU when I was in my Catholic grammar school, and I came home from school and found my mother watching TV in the afternoon, which, for those of you who are over 60, know that was not a regular occurrence. The TV wasn't on that often. And she was crying. And so I asked her why, and she said, ask your father when he comes home. And after dinner, I asked my dad why, and he told me about Senator McCarthy and about what were called the Army McCarthy hearings and about what they were doing to blacklist people and to have people facing prison or loss of job and loss of status in the community for nothing more than speaking their minds and using the First Amendment as it was intended to be used.
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked my dad, what could I do? I think I was 9. And he said, you could join the ACLU. And he took me down to the bank on Saturday, and I took $2 out of my bank account. I had $12.50, so I was rich. It's the wealthiest I've ever been. And sent it to the ACLU, and I've been a member ever since.
Wow.
Okay.
And so when this job came up, I applied for it, and I was selected.
Wow.
And I have loved this job every day for 29 years. It makes me crazy, but I love what I do
Yeah.
because I believe in what I do.
Good for you. That's great.
And she hands out candy.
Really?
I started it about 25 years ago on Valentine's Day.
Oh, so it's not just like a Halloween thing.
No, I don't do Halloween. I avoid witches.
Yeah.
And so I started giving candy hearts to the committee members on the committees that I was before so often, Judiciary, now Criminal Justice, but there were 3 or 4 committees. And it has become now a situation where I testify before a lot more committees, and so now I have about 12 committees that I'm required to give candy to.
Yeah.
And when the Valentine's Day falls on a weekend day or something that's not a session day, I am accosted by representatives the following Tuesday. You missed Valentine's Day. No, I didn't. It was Saturday, and I didn't think you'd be here. And so,
Yeah.
it's become just great fun.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
look forward to it. They expect it, and I have a great time doing it. And nobody has to report it since the candy is worth about 59 cents.
Oh, there you go.
And if it's under $25, one is not required either to report it as a contribution, and I don't have to list them individually as the recipients of the candy.
Right.
I report the $25, it's up to close to $100 now that I spend on candy.
Sure.
I report that on my lobbying report, but I don't have to say to whom I gave the candy
Oh, okay.
because it's not worth enough to
Huh.
be mentioned.
Right.
Well, it depends. You've got people like me that can't afford it, and get other people to get some for them and stuff like that. So,
Right.
it could
Yeah.
be over-
You do tend to go around for the people who are not there on the day that I put the candy out
You notice-
and gather it up.
Well, that's
Yes.
just smart. I mean, that's.
Well, it would
that's
go.
good.
It might attract vermin.
Vermin,
He's
yes.
doing
yeah.
a public service.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
you just said, are you wicophobic?
No, actually
just trying to
not.
find out.
I'm Irish, and so I probably have relatives who were, in fact, if not Wiccan, who were probably witches. And there are a lot of people who think that I am as well. But that's a discussion for another day.
Yeah.
Yes.
That
No,
depends on what
it's
issue
just-
it is and what.
Halloween is approaching, and I don't want to offend
Oh, okay.
anyone
Right,
who,
right,
who
yeah.
might be involved in
Yeah.
witchcraft.
Well, then you
or
went on the
Wicca.
wrong program.
By the way, Elizabeth is watching and she says hi.
Oh, good. Hi, Elizabeth. She was the first co-host we had on here.
She had to move away.
She moved to Colorado
But she
just to
keeps
get away
watch
from
on
me. Yeah, it was really bad.
That happens a lot, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
it does.
Yeah.
It does. We have a 30% turnover in the legislature
Yeah.
because of me.
Really? Because of
Yeah,
you?
absolutely.
Term limits. That's good. You're limiting people's
I
terms.
terminate people's terms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to.
Representative Kirk, who I've known for quite some time, would you care to? He doesn't like to do this, but a little bit about why you're maybe involved in this or what you're comfortable with.
Be glad to, Gary. I've been in the legislature for 25 years, starting my 26th year this January, and started off with a real concern about how those people in Concord were ignoring the real people back home, in my case in Ware. And I felt that we needed more people who would fight harder for people back home. So I ran for the legislature and lost a couple of times and finally got elected and have been reelected for 13 terms, 26 years. And what I found when I got to Concord was that people are concerned about the folks back home, but there are other issues that take precedence.
Right.
And so it's been a constant battle to keep the focus as much as I can in Concord on remembering people back home. For example, when we did the budget this year, and in past years too, but especially this year, one of our major concerns was that when we passed the budget in order to live within our means, in other words, we didn't want spending to exceed expected revenues, both realistically estimated. We wanted to make sure that we did not inadvertently or intentionally downshift. That is to say, stop making a payment to the communities, which would result in an increase in local property taxes.
Correct. Yeah.
And we worked very hard to make sure that happened. For example, there was an issue with changing the state's contributions to cities and towns to pay part of their pension costs for the city and town employees and teachers and things like this. And although we cut the percentage that the state paid down to zero, from 25% to zero, we made sure that there were other ways that the cities and towns were reimbursed an equal number of dollars so that the local tax rate would not go up.
Okay.
So that's just one current day example of how the legislature does really think about the consequences for folks back home. The other thing, of course, is something we call local control. we had a legislative session today, and one of the bills that we dealt with was a bill dealing with sprinklers. Should we allow the state building code, in effect, to mandate that every single-family home in the community had to have a sprinkler?
Yeah, this came up a few weeks ago on our
Yeah,
show.
we had John Bird on,
Yeah.
we were talking about that. Yeah.
And so, at the end of the day, the legislature overrode the governor's veto and established the principle that although we grandfathered cities and towns that had otherwise decided, we would allow the individual, not the city or town, to decide whether he or she wanted his home sprinklered or not. And
Right.
that there wouldn't be a state mandate saying you have to do that. So those are two examples of the kinds of actions that I think represent Concord's, when I say Concord, I mean the legislature's, real concern for the individuals, both from a tax point of view and a personal responsibility point of view, a real concern for individuals back home. And that's one of the reasons why I went to Concord, one of the reasons why I constantly return after getting reelected. I want to make sure that we don't forget why we're here. It's not just to take care of the business of running the state. We need a state police. We need a judicial system. We need to fund an education system according to the courts. But we also need to recognize that most people, most of the time, really don't relate directly to that.
No.
We're all about living our own lives, and I want to make sure that as much as possible, every one of us can do that with as little interference as possible from the state.
See, now that's an honorable representative. I go up there for the free hamburgers.
Right, and the
And the
lasagna.
candy, the candy.
And the candy,
And
yeah.
the candy, so,
Right.
you know, to
Well,
each his own.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's different. you
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
It's all about priorities.
absolutely.
Just so you know, I have accepted Claire's candy.
Oh,
And yes, and
Well,
I
you
did
just- we just-
participate in the union
Lunch?
luncheon last year, not this
Last year, yeah.
So there are other things that go along
All
with
right,
this.
all right.
Yeah.
So you, wow. See?
Haven't you hoarded enough?
No, you can.
Well, thank you.
All right, back on topic. RFID radio. One of the things they were wanted to put in driver's license, they've already had was an RFID chip. An RFID chip is a chip that has an electronic chip that can basically, with the right devices, can actually keep track of people as they're going in and out of stores. It's there. I forget even what the alleged purpose was, but the alleged purpose was that, you know, if we have a radio frequency identifier, they can check your license and make sure it's valid, and they know it's not a fake license, and all this other stuff. But it really infringes on your liberty in that it keeps track of where you are.
Oh, yeah.
Well, let me try to introduce a different concept here.
Okay.
You've got a hand grenade, but I know that you're very much pro-gun, as am I. Guns can be used to kill people, murder people, do a great deal of harm, but guns can also do very good things, such as allow you to feed yourself or to protect yourself. So there's nothing intrinsically good or bad about the gun.
Right.
It depends upon the purpose for which it's being used. An RFID chip is the same. It's not good or bad. It can be used for things that we would all agree help people, or we might disagree, but some would say does not help people. For example, one of the uses that business puts these to is as a tag in various kinds of merchandise. Walmart, for example, used to tag pallets of merchandise with an RFID chip so they could keep track of it. An RFID
Sure.
chip usually is passive, and when it's queried by a reader, a device that you have to hold within, say, a foot or as
Depends
could be
on the
more.
chip and
It depends
the
on the
reader.
chip. If it's an active chip that has battery power, 30 feet or 50 feet. If it's a passive chip that doesn't have its own power, a smaller distance. And Walmart could track stuff. Where is this pallet of goods? Then they started putting RFID chips on individual items, such as, for example, each computer printer, a Hewlett-Packard computer printer in the store, and they would tag each of those. Some companies were putting RFID chips in shoes. Michelin, I think it was Michelin, was putting them in tires. The question is not whether it has a chip. The question is what use to which the information that chip can provide is put. For example, if the only thing that is done with the chip is to allow a merchant to follow the merchandise as it moves through the supply chain and to make sure that it's not being stolen by employees or customers, that we've got enough stock on the shelves to meet the demand, and those kinds of things, it seems to me that that's a reasonable thing.
Sure.
And a very desirable thing to have done. Saves all of us some money, maybe they make some more profit, my price is lower, the people who should get the stuff get it, the people who shouldn't don't. The problem is when an RFID chipped item is followed, for example. I buy something in Walmart, and then I leave Walmart and go home and then go to another store and so forth. Now it's possible through a series of readers that I could be followed.
Right.
Or if it's in a mall, I go to the Gap and then go out into the mall and then to another store. With enough readers in enough places, one could be followed. Or, if not followed, the Gap could use the same kind of reader with a common chip and determine where I went before and what I had bought.
Right.
Moreover, these chips can read, or the readers can read a chip through your clothing. So, for example, if you have some items in a purse, the tag on those can be read. Or your underwear, if it were chipped, could be read, so that you buy something in one store, and maybe it's drugs in a drugstore. It could be read in another store, depending upon whether there's commonality in the system and what information the chip has. So again, the issue for me is not whether something is chipped, but whether the chip is being used for some socially desirable purpose or for some socially undesirable purpose.
Right.
I guess I come at this from a different perspective in some sense, from Representative Kirk. And that is that when this discussion about the chips started around Real ID, the discussion was that the federal government wanted to standardize driver's licenses throughout the 50 states. So the New Hampshire license would look exactly like the Alaska license, which would look exactly like the Colorado license. And they were going to insert an RFID chip in there that would contain certain data about you. It was never actually, even though the questions were asked in the New Hampshire legislature at hearings, what they were going to put on the chip. And the feds who came to testify never answered the question, either because they hadn't decided yet or they had decided and they didn't want us to know.
Yeah.
But the concern was that if, for example, the chip contained my Social Security number, my mother's maiden name, my birth date, my physical description, and perhaps my bank account number at Merrimack County, then they would have an enormous amount of information about me, which they could use to determine a whole lot of things
Right.
that are none of their business and that shouldn't be the cost of driving a car. In addition, the readers that Representative Kirk talked about can be held in hand by anybody. You can pick them up for about $30.
Right.
And so an individual could read the chip on my license, in my wallet,
Oh,
in
yeah.
my purse,
It's already happening, yeah.
as I'm walking by her or him on a sidewalk.
And you never
And
even
they
know.
have my mother's maiden name, my birth date, my Social Security number, etc. The potential for intrusion and invasion and identity theft is almost beyond description.
Yeah.
And it was poo-pooed by those who came from Washington to testify. But fortunately, people like Neil Kirk, who was the leader in the opposition for this, and made an extraordinary speech on the floor of the House that I think is legendary to overturn the committee report on a particular bill. He and others, and he was able to convince others, became so concerned about the intrusion into their citizens' privacy, into their constituents' privacy, and their own, that they said New Hampshire became the fourth state to say, in effect, can I say the
Yeah,
word
go
hell
ahead.
on
Yeah.
hell no, we won't go. New Hampshire won't do it. And we became the rallying cry. We came very close to being the first state to not do it,
Yeah.
but we were the fourth. And then state after state said, well, wait a minute, if they don't have to do it, we don't have to do it.
Yeah.
There are a couple of issues with Real ID, and while there is a possibility that the chip could contain this information, a lot of it could be encrypted so that it would be harder to read. Under a variation of Real ID, the enhanced driver's license, which would be a voluntary kind of thing, the chip would not contain any of the information Claire talked about, but just a simple number, which then could be connected to a computer, which could access the state's database, and therefore all of that information about Claire that she just described would appear on the screen of the arresting police officer or a customs official or so forth. The problem with Real ID was the concern that Claire expressed, but also the fact that this was going to become a de facto national identification card in the same way
Right.
our Social Security number has become a de facto national identification
No,
number.
whoa. The federal government clearly said when they introduced the Social Security number, that was strictly for Social Security and would never be used.
It says that on your
Never.
Social
It says that
Security
on the
card, but the Congress has created over the decades enough exceptions to make
Yeah.
Swiss cheese look solid. So, as a matter of fact, once that exists, a Social Security number, a common identification card, no matter what Congress says at the time it creates it, they will find valid reasons later on to say, well, we'll make an exception here, until we become what I call a papers, please society. You will not be able to do anything without that kind of a document.
Right.
That's number one. Number two, the result of this was going to be a national database controlled by the federal government that contained all of the information Claire said, plus more, in this national database that the government would have about each of its citizens. Now, the one thing that I know about government is that the less it knows about me, the freer I am. And this applies not just to government, it applies to businesses as well.
Sure, absolutely.
So I find it very important to limit the amount of information that the government has about all of us. Information is power. I may not be able to determine today what purpose, good or bad, the government will use that information for, but this I know. I want to be the one to control what they learn about me. I don't want some congressman or some state legislator, rather than the individual, to say, well, now that we have all this information, here's how we're going to use it, and you don't have any choice.
Yeah, but if the government has that much information about you and is able to use that to control things like terrorism, to learn to control, uses that information by having that kind of information to control a lot of the crime and drug dealing. I mean, really, if you're opposed to that, doesn't that person have something to hide that doesn't want the government?
No, not at all. I have nothing to hide, but I certainly don't want the government to know, for example, what books and periodicals I either read or take out of the library. I don't want the government to know what websites I visit. I don't want the government to know anything about my personal life, what I do, where I go, what I think, who I speak to, who my family members are. It's none of their business. That's not the kind of information that I think the government should have to regulate and protect me. Remember, from my point of view, the purpose of the government is to allow me to live as free a life as possible, consistent with your right to do the same thing. They don't need all of that information to make sure that I'm empowered to live my life. And
Right.
so I guess I have a basic concern, not a distrust, but a basic concern that government needs to play as small a possible role in individuals' lives. I don't want to empower them through information to
Right.
do more than is absolutely necessary.
The answer to the question, what do you have to hide, is I have my privacy to protect. It is none of their business where I go or what I do unless I commit a crime. And with regard to drug dealers or those who would do us egregious harm, terrorists and whatever, they probably don't have Social Security numbers. And if they do have something with the chip is probably somebody else's.
Good point. Yeah. But Elizabeth makes a comment, by the way, via text that RFID is contrary to Jeffersonian style government.
In what way?
That's her.
Text why? In what way?
Well, she'll hear us. She'll hear us. Oh, maybe that's in the next text. Wait, I gotta.
Wait.
Oh,
Don't tell me.
the next text says, "Amen, brother." She was responding to what you said.
Oh.
By the way, I wonder how many people realize the government can track us with these pretty easily.
Oh, indeed, yes.
Is that why
yeah.
you don't have a cell phone, Gary?
No, I'm cheap.
Oh, okay.
Let me just comment that you're right. Government or private business can track us through our cell phones.
Yeah.
And I have a bill that is before the Commerce Committee that would ban both the government and the private sector from tracking people to find out where you are.
Yeah. You know what the excuse is, right? Why the government, at least what I've always been told, is in case you're in a car accident or something, like say you get into a wreck and you're at the side of the road and you're unconscious.
Because the government loves you, man. Okay?
Right.
They're,
And they
they're
can-
looking out for you.
Yes.
And you don't even appreciate it.
But Matt, if a first responder needs to find out where you are,
Yeah.
and because let's say you got lost in the woods and your wife has reported you missing,
Right.
that's an emergency situation.
Right.
You can justify that.
Right.
But they
Of
don't
course.
need to know where you are all during the time you're going between your work and visiting various places and your friends.
Right.
That really doesn't help them solve the emergency situation.
Right,
And this
right.
tracking bill allows that kind of exception.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, well, I do have another.
So you're not going to die as a result of this bill passing.
That's good. The exact reason he stated. I guess she's answering the question about the Jeffersonian.
Yeah.
That's hard to do that by text.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, why don't you call in?
Yeah,
Give
call
us a
in
call.
for Christ's sake. I don't know what
Yeah.
you're talking about.
Yeah.
I never did when you were co-hosting either.
You do know Jefferson, though?
Thomas?
Yes.
Yeah, I was there.
I know him too. I call him
Yeah.
TJ.
Yeah.
I grew up calling him TJ. He was my hero
Yeah.
Is your hero?
as a child growing up. Yes.
Yeah. What did Reagan? Was it Reagan that said something about with all the advisors I have in this room, something about they still don't match the intelligence
No,
of
it
Thomas
was
Jefferson.
it was
What
actually John Kennedy.
John Kennedy.
And when he gave a speech before the awards group that met at the White House for all of the extraordinary arts and music and science awards that I'm forgetting the name of the specific prize that is given, he began his speech by saying, "This is quite possibly the most scholarly and intelligent group of people ever to gather in this building, with the probable exception of when Thomas Jefferson dined alone."
Oh, okay.
That's the one. That's the
That's
one I was
good.
thinking
Yeah.
of.
Yeah.
Oh, see, that's why I don't like her. She can remember stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Not much.
Not much.
Clara, I do have to ask you this question. You said you joined the ACLU when you were 9 years old.
Yes.
Is yours the longest standing membership of any member of the organization?
I was at a conference in Orlando, an ACLU conference in the spring, and there was another man there who joined at about the same time I did, and he was older than I. So he decided I'd been a member longer since I joined younger. But I would bet I'm close,
Yeah. Huh.
Wow.
Wow. Good for you.
because if I can figure out, yeah, I guess I've been a member for probably 60 years or more.
Wow.
Now, with Real ID and RFID, there was a. I look for things on the news that are blips. They come on the news really quickly, and then you never hear about them again.
Sure. Yeah.
Because those are the ones that scare me the most.
Yeah.
And the blip was right around 9/11. Was a gentleman, I believe he was in Florida, that was an expert and had worked out the software for data mining.
Mm-hmm.
Data mining is taking information, say from the internet. Well, you clicked on this website, you clicked on that website, and like Neil was saying about the, they buy this book or they buy this,
Yeah.
and they build a profile about individuals around the country
Right.
for the purpose of advertising.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it was originally used for.
Right.
The blip on the radar screen back in 2001 was that same gentleman had been hired by the federal government,
Really
yeah, to start data mining on us.
interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Now
Yeah.
think about that in conjunction with RFID. Not only do they know what you bought, what websites you went to, and everything else, they know when you went where, who you went with. When they have that much power, they have complete control of you.
Oh, yeah. Well, unless, of course, the idea is they're going to take that information and sell it to advertisers to generate revenue to pay down the debt. Maybe that's what it is.
Oh, that's probably a good idea.
It could be
then.
completely
I like that
innocuous.
idea.
An interesting fiscal approach.
I don't know. I'm just spitballing. I'm probably wrong.
So, as I understand those kinds of things, they're usually funded by an agency called DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration, and John Poindexter, former Admiral John Poindexter, was the head of that at one time. And I think what they're trying to do is to figure out ways to catch terrorists and protect the country by trying to identify the webs that connect us to other people. So if they can learn certain information about person A, they can determine his associates and the relationships he has with them and try to figure out all sorts of other things about what they're doing and therefore try to project what they might do.
Right.
I think those kinds of efforts are desirable in the sense that our government is supposed to protect us from
Right.
threats, domestic and foreign. The question is, how much of our privacy, how much of our individual information has to be surrendered in order to get that protection?
Right.
And are we willing to
And
make
how
that
much
sacrifice?
are we willing to give up?
One way or another.
Oh, we got a phone call.
It's Elizabeth.
Uh-oh.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, how are you guys?
Great. How are you? Good to
Hey,
hear your
hey,
voice.
I'm good.
Hey, wait, Elizabeth.
Yes, yes.
It's Cheryl's birthday yesterday.
I know. Trust me, I was thinking about her.
I'm going to say a couple things at the end, but I just wanted to let you know.
Thank you. Well, good topic. I didn't want to call in, but you baited me again. You gotta stop doing that to me. One of the things that concerns me most about the Real ID is something I read several months ago, and I believe I put it on my Facebook, is something, I believe it was by Verichip, and they started out using it for medical use, and they want to put it on people, and it's something I'd read about years ago that I thought, I believe I remember the World Bank organization in Europe had wanted to do this, but putting it on people in place of our wallets. And as much as I am very concerned about the use of it on products for the very reasons that both of your guests have mentioned, my greater concern is that it's put on people.
Let me at least attempt to ease your concern as long as you're in New Hampshire. And Gary has told me that you may be out in
She's
Colorado.
not, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
better-
now in Colorado, yes.
I think you better move back to New Hampshire. We have passed a statute
That's what we've been telling her.
that bans the implantation of these kinds of chips on any human being without their consent.
Yeah.
So
Without consent.
without consent. In other words, you cannot put a chip in or on a person unless you advise them of the fact you're doing this and they agree to it. This doesn't apply to your pets. If you want to put a chip inside your dog or cat, there's nothing in New Hampshire that prevents you.
Do they do that?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah,
yes.
they've been doing that since the 80s.
That's
But
where
I'm
it
hoping to
started.
lose my dog, so I'm not going to put a chip on him.
I had no idea they did that. I had no clue.
1980.
So come home,
Wow.
Elizabeth. We miss you.
Yes.
Trust me, I'm homesick right now.
No.
Yeah, I'll tell you. See, this is one of the cool things about us three here, because we come at this from completely different angles, as far as I can tell. In the 1980s, they started introducing microchips. Basically, they're the side of a grain of rice
Really?
that they were putting in animals to keep track of animals.
Right.
Okay? Well, I'm a born-again Christian, and the Bible says in Revelations 13 that at the end of days, the Antichrist,
Right, sign of the
Antichrist is going to force everybody to take the mark of their beast in their right hand or forehead, and nobody, lest they have the mark, shall be able to buy or sell
Or trade, yeah.
or trade. So when I heard that first in the 80s about the dogs and the farm animals and stuff like that, that's the bell that went off in my head. That's why this really shook me up. and why I'm so glad for Neil and Claire for all the hard work they do to fight this, because that's where it would head, is to a point where, being devil's advocate, if you had a chip in everybody's right hand or forehead, and nobody could ever buy or sell without that chip, you would get rid of prostitution, you would get rid of drug dealing, you would get rid of 30% of the nation's economy is underground, you would eliminate that. You would get rid of terrorism because we would know where they were going and when they went and,
Right.
and where they taken their money out. You would get rid of the theft of people's personal identity because it would have to
Gary,
be...
you're not saying you're for this.
No, I'm talking about the
Okay.
arguments for it are so compelling.
Right.
If people aren't aware of the danger of it, it's a slam dunk.
They're liable to fall for that.
They're going to fall for
Yeah.
it because people, the government really wouldn't hurt us. They love us.
Unless you feel strongly about small government, about
Right.
the Jeffersonian government or early American history, and you want to return to that type of government.
Right, and that's the problem, is people aren't aware of that. There's a lot of people out there that are so busy just trying to pay their bills that they
Right.
aren't really aware. And if somebody said, "Hey, we got a cure for the drug problem in your school, and we got a cure for this," they go, "Oh, okay, good."
Right.
And then
Sign me up.
sign me up. And then they'll have radicals like us 4 or 5 that will, and they'll say, "Well, they're just crazy."
Wait,
So-
I'm a radical? That's awesome.
You are. You're a domestic terrorist.
Oh, okay.
Welcome to the no-fly list.
Well, then how am I going to get back there? All right, you guys, carry on. Love you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
take care.
Elizabeth. Bye-bye.
Gary, you mentioned a grain of rice. It's possible to make those chips small enough to fit inside a pill in your medicine bottle, okay? And it's also possible to make them so they can be placed with ink, for example, on money, if you want to follow the money in the most literal sense.
Right.
One of the arguments in favor of putting these chips inside pills was so that doctors could determine whether patients were actually taking their medication or not. I mean, you can imagine the intrusiveness
Yeah.
of this kind of thinking. And please note, it's done by people who are not bad people. They
No.
really have what they
best of
consider to be
motives.
the common good at heart.
They're useful idiots, in a
No,
sense.
they're not idiots.
Well, I mean
these
it as a figure of speech. I don't.
These people are very well intentioned.
Right.
They have a set of values that rank certain things higher than other things. And fortunately, at least in New Hampshire, the legislature has taken the position, no, we don't want to go down that track.
Right.
People are responsible for themselves, and although we want to help people, we don't want to replace their own personal responsibility with a government set of procedures that safeguards them but absolves them of any responsibility for their own actions.
Right.
So it's like the old saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
My aunt the
Yes.
nun used to refer to that a lot. That with
Yeah.
her favorite blessing for people she didn't like, which was, may you go to your eternal reward soon.
I dig that. That's awesome.
Irish nuns.
Did she ever say that to you, Claire?
No,
No.
never. I was her favorite. I was her favorite. I was mouthy, but I was her
Yeah.
favorite.
Yeah.
But one of the things that happens when a society begins to accept that their privacy is gone is that they become unaware that privacy even exists. I go into as many high school and college classrooms as I can, and it is quite amazing the number of young people, high school seniors, high school juniors, who don't think that privacy exists anymore. But they have no idea that when they put something, Elizabeth mentioned it, when they put something on Facebook, it's there forever.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
When it's on the internet, you have lost control of who sees it, who knows it, who watches it, who notes it. And the young people think that they can put things onto Facebook or on their pages or what. I don't even know what they are. I've never seen Facebook. I've never looked at Facebook. I never will.
Yeah.
I'm happy being ignorant of things that I don't trust. But they think that when something bad or something extraordinary, a picture of them drinking, for example, when they're 16 years old, that they put that on Facebook as a lark or a joke, and don't have any conception that when they're 25 and looking for a job, that their prospective employer can find that.
Yeah.
And so it is almost an educational process that has to be engaged in to teach young people that their privacy is essential to their future. It is essential to their remaining free beings, and they need to protect it.
Yeah.
This gets back to the question you asked before, Gary, about people who say, well, why should I be concerned? I have nothing to hide. We all do silly things. We do it more so as younger people and hopefully less so as older people.
Oh,
but
no,
still.
no, I'm still ridiculous.
I remember that when I was a youth, it was very important not to get caught and get a criminal record of using drugs, because if that were the case, certain government occupations would be off limits.
Sure.
You
So you
couldn't
didn't get
have-
caught, is what you're saying.
Exactly. If you and
Right. Well, yeah, practically
Yeah.
speaking, yeah.
And what happened was that when somebody was caught using drugs, they would want very much to plea bargain it down to, I guess it was a misdemeanor, because a misdemeanor would not disqualify you,
Right.
but a felony would.
Right.
And so that game was played between the cops and the kids who were smoking marijuana and maybe dealing marijuana. Today, Claire is right. That same thing is happening unbeknownst to us. We're creating records of what we do, either on Facebook or when we use our cell phones or our email accounts. And that information, if it were available to the government, for example, or to the private sector, could be used, as Claire suggested, to deny you a job. Or it could be used by your either political enemies or your economic competitors to your disadvantage. Information about you is a tool in somebody else's hands, and you lose control over whether he uses it to help you or to hurt you, whether it's the government or the private sector. So we need to be very careful that information remains in your hands, and you never are put in the position of saying, oh my goodness, they learned something about me that I really didn't want them to know, and now it's coming back to haunt me. So the people who say, I have nothing to hide, it may be that they don't have any criminal record and they don't really care if you see a picture of them at 16 drinking. But what they don't think about is what other people can use that information for in ways adverse to them in the future.
Yep.
We need to be concerned about who has information about us now, so we avoid those problems.
And one of the things I think that ought to be of great concern to people, we've been talking almost exclusively about the government, but much of the data that's kept on all of us is held by the private sector. And what happens often, well, for me it's twice as too often.
Yeah.
What is happening or beginning to be talked about happening is the government convincing some of the private holders of extraordinary amounts of data on each of us to give it to them without a warrant, without court intervention, just to be a good partner with the government. And so your cell phone provider has an enormous amount of information about you. Your internet provider has an enormous amount of information about you. And if the government seeks that information and the private sector, in order not to be persuaded that the government is going to do something to them, gives this information up, there are very few controls right now that protect you, because it's not illegal in most cases for Comcast to share information with the government. In my view, it ought to be. It ought to be illegal without a court order, without a warrant.
And I'm aware of that too, Claire, and in the tracking bill, in my bill banning the government from collecting biometric data about us, there are sections in there that says what you cannot do directly, because it's banned by this, you may not do indirectly by acquiring the information from others. It's an important issue, and thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, well, I know one of the issues that bothered me last term, I couldn't do anything about because it was kind of steamrolled through, was the and people are too free with it, is as DNA evidence. Years ago, DNA evidence was strictly for kept for rapists and murderers or violent crime, people who committed violent crime. So everybody said, "Oh, that's okay." Well, last year or what year before, I forget which, you guys might remember, it was changed to people who have been hopefully convicted, but I don't even know about that, of any, what is it called? What's it called for 1 year or more?
Felony.
Any felony. Well, a felony is pretty easy to do, because a felony, all a felony is a violating a law that could end you up in jail for 1 year or more.
Right.
Okay, so like taking candy from Claire could land me in jail for a year for, exaggerating, of course.
Yes.
Oh, good. I'm relieved because you gave this to me and I thought I was in trouble.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
But,
Let
go
me
ahead.
play devil's advocate. What's wrong? And this is a database that the state government is collecting about people who are convicted and jailed. Originally, the bill said this list of very, very serious offenses. And then there was another effort to expand that list, and finally, they're going for all felonies. Just so you know, the federal government wants to collect DNA information, not just about people who are convicted of felonies or even minor offenses, which we call misdemeanors, but anyone who was arrested. They would have this huge database.
Yeah.
Now, we don't allow that in New Hampshire, but what's wrong with the government having the sample of your DNA or Claire's or mine?
The problem is this goes back to exactly what we talked about before, which is the quantity of information. If the government has every bit of information about you, they own you. Okay? They know too much, and it is my right. What does the Constitution say? The liberty, pursuit of
Life, liberty,
No, not that one. What is about? You have the right to be secure in your own person.
Persons and
Right.
papers.
Okay, you have a right to your own privacy, to your right to your own secure in your own person, in your own possessions. If the government has all that information, you just lost that right.
Right. Yeah.
Because they have it. Okay? Gathering DNA evidence on people means that now
But these guys are criminals, Gary.
No, they've been convicted.
Yes, they're convicts.
They're
Yeah,
convicts, but they're not necessarily criminals. There are a great many people who are exonerated on death row every year. And so you have people who are in the system,
Right.
convicted of a crime, and did not commit that crime. And once the information is in the database, there is no way to get it out.
I'll give
In
you a
New Hampshire, you can expunge it after, on court order,
On court order,
if your
if-
conviction has been overturned, et cetera.
Or if it's been annulled,
Yes.
or yes.
I'll give you an example. Is I know. Oh shoot! I didn't realize what time it was.
Yeah, we're almost out of time. I just noticed it too. I was.
Oh yeah, I gotta. But anyway,
Time flies when you're having
it
does,
It
it does.
really does.
It's been a
The
good
show,
discussion.
This show always goes like this. doesn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
Yeah. No,
It was special. It always goes like this?
No, this is more faster. This is a lot
Yes, yeah,
faster.
yeah. This is even more special. Yeah.
Yeah, usually the hour takes about 35 minutes. Today it was like 15.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. That's what he meant. Yeah,
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 that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
Nice save.
yeah. Well done, sir.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I still have my, my brother left 3 bottles of beer in the back of my car, or my dad's car, when I was 17. And I was driving around, well, I wasn't even driving, the cops grabbed me and brought me down to the station, fingerprinted me. Okay, so I wasn't convicted. But the fact is, my fingerprints are still on file,
Yep.
and that still bothers me.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it's the same kind of thing. It's one thing to deny your liberty after you've been convicted.
Right.
It's completely different to deny your liberty because they think you might do something.
Preemptive denial.
Preemptive, yeah.
I've coined a new phrase.
Yeah, preemptive.
It's good science fiction, though.
Yeah, they had that
Yeah.
movie. Remember with Tom Cruise,
Oh, Minority Report.
Minority Report.
Yeah.
Same thing. They're gonna between data mining and DNA evidence. they're gonna just put me away they should have put me away a long time ago.
No, Gary, we like you.
Yeah,
We think you ought to be out among us.
really?
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah,
find a
where we can
lawyer.
keep an eye on
You
you.
find a lawyer?
I'll find a lawyer.
Yeah, I heard you know some good ones.
I know several extraordinary ones.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Let's see, next week we have Representative Paul Ingersoll and Representative George Lambert, and they're going to come here to talk about the Committee of Redress.
Okay.
Under the Constitution, you have the right to redress of grievances, and that's what we're going to talk about. But in the last minute, I want to talk about Cheryl, who had her birthday yesterday. She would have been 42. She was the young lady that was murdered in Ware quite a few months ago, Cheryl Mayer. And her sister, Linda, was going to come out, and she was supposed to come on and watch the show tonight.
Oh, really?
But Cheryl's ex-husband wouldn't allow her to see the kids if she did come out.
Oh.
So she felt it was not worth her time. So I'm going to ask people to keep, most people, when they hear stuff like that, they want to get angry at this guy and stuff. Don't. Pray for him.
Yeah.
Pray for the kids. Cheryl's kids are with their biological father. Pray for the kids, and pray for him too. Because vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, not vengeance is mine, saith Gary Hopper. That's his job. Ours is to love people regardless.
Well said.
Yeah, but I didn't mean it. Anyway,
It was still well said, Gary.
thank you, Representative Kirk, or Neil, as I call you occasionally, for coming on the show tonight. Thank you, Claire.
Yes,
Evil.
thank you both.
You guys are awesome, and I hope to have you back again to talk about something exactly the same.
Well, perhaps when Representative Kirk's bill is passed by the Commerce Committee next week and comes to the floor and passes the floor of the House, we can come back and talk about it going into the Senate and passing there,
That would be very good, too.
the tracking bill.
The
Yes.
tracking bill. We can't let the government have that much control
Right.
of us.
Agreed.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Thank you,
You're
Gary.
the second best.
Thank you. I'll take that.
Have a good night, folks.